Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are, and welcome to FreeThought Hour, my weekly show in which I have at least one guest, maybe more. And thank you if you've just come from watching Global Atheist News, which is the show that I do that precedes this every week. So I have a guest, and we've never had a lawyer before, so this is a first. And he's a very interesting guy, and he's topical at the moment because he's just launched, together with a small team of activists, a northern branch of Atheism UK. Here he is, Guy Otten. How the devil are you, Guy?
Good, thanks. Yes.
Good. Okay. I'm okay too. Thanks for not.
Excellent. You're looking good.
Well, thank you. Yeah, people say that. But it's all to do with having gone through cosmetics on the way here. No, it's not. No. So I've flagged you up as an interesting guy because you've had connections not just with law per se, but with mental health, haven't you?
Yes. I mean, I wouldn't describe myself as a lawyer anymore because I've been retired for 10 years.
Yes.
But I was in the legal profession from the mid 70s until 2011 when I retired. So that's I suppose that's 35 odd years.
And that's a career, yes, that counts. And I know what you mean about not describing yourself in that way now, because you have to keep up, don't you?
Yes, that's right. I notice that all the time. And one of the things I'm involved in is supporting ex-Muslims and refugees and asylum seekers as part of my role in Greater Manchester Humanists, and also in a charity in Rochdale called Friends of Shamwari, which my partner runs. And I mean, immigration law is fast moving, and fast changing, and but we go along and to tribunals and things like this and speak up for claimants, and we give them some advice, but we have to basically refer them to lawyers who are actually on the ball with all this. I mean, I was an immigration judge at the end, strangely enough, only for about 3 or 4 years. I thoroughly enjoyed it, but I found it really hard, much harder than mental health tribunal judging and social security tribunal judging, which I also did.
Yes, I'm so glad that I've never been. Well, I won't say never, because I was once in a position where I did have to make judgments, because during my 10 years on our local council, I got on the licensing committee, and so we had people come and appeal to be permitted to do certain things that needed licensing. And
I've got a funny story about that. I'll tell you in a minute if you like.
Sure, I'd like that. Yes. Well, and I ended up on one occasion actually having to chair this committee,
right?
Which it made me think maybe I don't ever want to be a judge, because you have to make a decision, and that's can be a painful thing.
Yes.
Okay, let's hear your anecdote then.
Well, I mean, when I was a solicitor, I had a client who considered that the road traffic laws didn't really apply to him, so he was a very good client from the commercial point of view.
Yes.
And he decided one time that he wanted to start a taxi firm, and he got all the equipment, for the radio and all that kind of stuff, and he set it up, and he applied for a license, and he was refused, quite rightly, because he was obviously totally unsuitable. So he employed me to appeal to the licensing committee, and I went on and I ignored his huge long list of convictions, and I went on about what a great bloke he was and how he had black people off the street, in his workshop, giving them a bit of apprenticeship, and how he jumped out of aeroplanes for charity, and a few completely irrelevant things like this. And they bloody well passed. They allowed the appeal. Couldn't believe it. I mean, I'd obviously done too good a job, but I mean, that's what I was employed to do.
Yes,
Anyway,
yeah.
the police just parked at the end of his street, and they stopped every taxi coming out of the place, and none of them had insurance or road tax, or
Ooh,
they were all dodgy, and you know,
yeah.
so that's how they stopped it. So,
So that didn't do much for his reputation, and probably not a lot for yours.
no, I mean, he still employed me, but you know,
Yeah,
he was an eccentric. He was a great guy.
yeah, yeah.
He spent most of his time being disqualified from driving,
Yes.
but he had a horse, and he on one occasion he actually rode into the court, up to the court, and tied the horse outside the court building. Things like that.
A real what's the word? English eccentric. Yes.
Yes, and he was Jamaican as well. I made it.
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So the first thing that I normally ask my guests is for a potted biography. So, how did you get to be the guy Otten you are today? And I'm going to full screen you while you tell us a little bit about your journey through life. Is that okay?
Okay.
Great. Here we go.
All right. Well, I started off being born in 1947 and brought up as a Catholic, and I was sent to private schools. And my main school, my secondary school was a Catholic public school, and then I went on to university. And it was at university I met people for the first time, really, who for whom Catholicism was not the thing they agreed with.
Not
So I
normal.
had quite a coddled existence up to then.
Yes. Yes.
And I started questioning, and I found a sort of radical form of Christianity, of Catholicism. There was a group called Pax Christi, a sort of Catholic peace movement. And of course, this was the time of the Vietnam War, so that was all going on, and I was influenced by Martin Luther King
Mm-hmm.
and Gandhi, and I fell in with a group of Quakers.
Mm-hmm.
And so I ended up actually leaving Catholicism because I couldn't stand the, all the things you had to believe in, which I didn't agree with.
Yes.
And I became a Quaker.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a Quaker for 25 years. But
Right.
I took it seriously, and I did Bible study, and I, thought about it, and I read widely. And finally, as a lawyer, you think about evidence, and I came to the conclusion there really wasn't a good enough evidence to justify believing in God. And then I realized that actually the same applies to all gods.
Yes. Oh, yes.
And all religions.
Yes.
And so I looked around for, and there I became an atheist, which was something I'd never thought I would do, but I did. And I then started looking around, and I found humanism. And I like humanism. I regard myself as a humanist, an atheist humanist. And so I've become active, particularly in the last 15 years in the Greater Manchester Humanists. But I did spend 6 years on the Humanist UK board. When I retired, I became a Humanist Celebrant. I've stopped that now after 10 years or 8 years, and now I do humanist chaplaincy, which is very interesting. I'm in a psychiatric unit, and I work alongside religious chaplains, but we do basically the same work.
Can I just stop you there? I want to track back a little bit because some of our audience might not know what a celebrant does.
Right. So a humanist celebrant, well, actually, there are non-humanist celebrants as well, who, and the key thing is that a celebrant will not follow a religious ritual in a funeral or a wedding or a christening. They will celebrate the life or the event that's happening. And so humanist celebrants will not bring any religion in at all, although they won't say no if somebody else wants to mention that they'll see Granny in heaven or something. That's not a problem. So the humanist funeral, conducted by a humanist celebrant, is going to be a celebration of the life of the that's gone, and people do like that. They like that much more than the rather sort of dry, standard sort of religious funerals, which just talk about going to heaven, and they don't really talk about the person hardly at all. And the same sort of principle applies for weddings and christenings, or we call them namings, because there, you well, in all humanist ceremonies, you have the freedom to do anything that you feel is appropriate. And so there's no prescription. It's all about freedom and creativity and joy and happiness. And, and that's why people like them, because they're essentially a bit of formality on the beginning of a party.
Yes.
Well, certainly for weddings and namings.
Yes.
Even funerals, possibly.
Well, Irish wakes, for example.
Yeah, I mean, well, following most funerals, there is a reception.
Yes,
and some receptions can get quite rowdy and joyous and drunken, but others not. It depends on the sort of community. I didn't mention much about my career as a lawyer. Do you want me to say more about that?
Well, I would, because I know that you dealt with some mental health cases.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, but my legal career, I did most types of common sort of work at one stage, but I focused on crime and mental health. And the position for patients who are sectioned in a mental hospital is that is a deprivation of their liberty, and they have a right of appeal to a mental health review tribunal. And that mental health review tribunal then considers the evidence and decides whether the patient does actually require to be sectioned, usually because they're not just they've got a mental disorder, but also they're a threat to their own safety or to the safety of other people. That's the essence of the law.
Yes. So it's different but similar to a conviction. It's similar in that a decision has been made to remove the freedom and look after the person for their own and others' safety. But it's different in that there need not necessarily have been a crime committed.
That's right.
What we're looking at here is a medical judgment.
Correct.
Yeah. Rather than a criminal one.
That's right. I mean, the medical judgment is originally made by psychiatrists and social workers, and they're the ones who actually section somebody. Then there's a right of appeal, and the tribunal then looks at the situation as at the date of the tribunal. But there is also a different section which does follow a criminal conviction, and that's called the hospital order. They're also dealt with by mental health review tribunals. And then there's a higher level again for the very serious criminal acts, the extremely serious, murders and so forth. Psychopaths. And they have hospital orders accompanied by something called a restriction. That restriction means that actually the Home Office itself becomes a party to their section and to the tribunal, and they have the right to be heard and to make decisions in addition to the psychiatrist, or sometimes in place of the psychiatrist has to request the Home Office, for instance, if they want to give such a person a little bit of leave to leave the hospital as part of their treatment stay.
There was a case recently, wasn't there, where somebody was released from a imprisonment, and 3 days later he was stabbing people in Streatham.
Yes. Well, I mean, the trouble is that this is not a open and shut, easy, straightforward, scientific sort of judgment. It's a bit of somewhat of a work of art. Yes, there was that This is happening all the time, unfortunately, but it's very
Yeah.
rare. Most of the time, the parole board and the tribunals get it right, I think. But
Mm.
there's a small percentage, and that percentage hit the headlines quite naturally
Mm.
because
Mm.
people are really worried about it and really upset
Yeah.
and scared.
Yes.
But on the other hand, you cannot keep people in hospital who appear to be well.
No.
And but if you are there following a serious conviction and you have a restriction, you are going to be kept in some sort of detention and hospital situation or some halfway house maybe for quite a long time.
Yes.
And they really make sure that you're back on track. And then when you are finally discharged, it's conditional on all kinds of
Yes. So that's something else where it's a bit of a pitfall, isn't it? Because humans are not like physics. We're dynamic. We
yeah,
change,
yeah,
and so there was a case more recently where this was in Liverpool when one he'd never been in jail, but he'd been refused uh, a visa a couple of times, and he made a bomb and blew himself up in a taxi.
yes, that one. Yes, yes,
Mm.
yes. I mean, I don't know. He was not sectioned, but
No.
he was reported to have had mental health problems.
Yes.
And actually, the reality is that asylum seekers who are refused asylum
Mm.
and then not removed or cannot go back to their country
Mm.
often do have mental health problems because they live in a hopeless situation.
Yes. Yes.
You know, they can't go anywhere. They live
No.
in dire poverty because
Yes.
the support they get is really very minimal. So
Yes.
it doesn't surprise me that he
No.
had mental health problems. And I actually know somebody who has had mental health problems and has tried to take his life a couple of times.
It's
And
understandable, as you say, because they can't go back. They 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 would probably be executed,
yeah,
stoned, or something if they went back.
mm,
And yet, if they've not been permitted to stay, they
mm.
they've got no life here either.
No,
So it's enough to drive anyone crazy.
some of them are literally destitute and sleeping on church floors and stuff like
Mm.
this.
Mm.
But a lot of them then apply again. Once you've been refused, you can make a
Mm.
fresh application if you can persuade the Home Office that there are fresh facts. And this,
Yes.
I think, may be partly why that character went to the Liverpool Cathedral and converted to Christianity. He may or may not have been genuine, but one of the things that meant is that he could then go to the Home Office, make a fresh application, say, "Oh, I'm now a Christian,
Yes. Yes.
and here's the Reverend such and such." And
Yes.
of course, we have that in humanism as well. People come to us and say they don't believe in God, and
Mm.
and we have to be very careful
Yes.
before we go to a tribunal and say yes, we think this person is genuine, to make
Mm.
sure that we are satisfied it's genuine, because it
Mm.
may well be not so.
And there again, you're into judgment, and so
Well, yeah,
it's very
and,
soft sand, isn't it?
yeah. But I mean, if when I was a tribunal judge, if a vicar came along and said, "Well, this
Mm.
person has been a member of my church for X number of years now, and
Mm.
he's doing this, and he takes the Sunday school, and he's
Mm.
respected,"
Mm.
I will give that quite a lot of weight. I used
Yes.
to do that, and when
Yes.
I go similarly and say it, I notice that usually my evidence is given respect and weight as well.
Yes. Yes.
So not always, but most of the time it is.
Mm.
Uh, so that's what I do.
Mm.
But
Well,
only if I'm satisfied. And sometimes they say, "Well, can you be sure?" And I can say, "Well, I can't be sure
nobody can
100%.
be
You
sure.
can never know what is inside
There,
someone's
there
mind."
is no certainty. Mm.
No.
Well, we went into evidence and how you weigh it and make
Yeah,
judgments in
yeah,
a previous video that we made
mm,
together.
yeah,
And I want to dive off from your life story for the moment. We'll come back to it because I want to ask you about what you're doing now, because you're in helping out in mental hospitals, aren't you? So
Yeah.
that's worthy of a part of our chat. But when you did your evidence PowerPoint presentation, which we've already posted on a couple of channels, I was thinking that there's a lot of stuff there which applies to the legal situation, which doesn't apply or is applied differently in my field. Because, as you know, I'm a retired science teacher, so my criteria are different. As I said when I mentioned physics, that's different from humans. It's much more cut and dried. There's no variation to speak of, and so
yes, well, you've got the scientific method there, which is an established way of
yes,
using observations to try and test a model. And so, I mean, that's great, and that's one of the best ways, I think, of finding out about the natural world. But
so
you can't use quite the same methods when you're looking at historical texts and evidence. You can some of the time, but if you're looking at a text like the Bible or the Quran or some other scripture, there's a limit to, you can't do scientific tests in the quite the same way. Oh, you can, of course, you can test the age of the paper and the ink and all this kind of thing.
But that's peripheral. It doesn't test the actions that it reports. There's no way we can repeat historic events. No. So I'm going to show my PowerPoint presentation. I think I've only got 5 slides, which is a sort of a follow-up from yours that we can chat about.
Okay.
Here we go. So that's not the right one. Let me go back. That's the last slide. I want to go back to the start. There. So we call this evidence. What is it? You did the legal viewpoint. I'm doing the science viewpoint.
Right. Yeah.
So there's a one sentence. You gave me that sentence. The legal interpretation of evidence is for settling disputes and finding guilt.
Well, that's what it's used for, but I mean, it's not restricted to that. But yeah, those are the main things.
And I would say, I would put attempting to find guilt.
Of course, yes,
in that sentence, because as we've indicated, there's a vagueness and an amount of doubt about this.
Yes.
So
that's right. And because evidence is always imperfect.
Yeah.
So that limits the effectiveness, or at least the ultimate validity of any dispute resolution or guilt finding.
That's an interesting point, because I would say even the best scientific evidence is not absolutely certain. It can't be 100% perfect, because it has to be considered by a brain, and that brings with it all sorts of
preconceptions and cultural biases and God knows what else.
Confirmation biases and things like that. Yes.
Yeah. So I shouldn't mention God there, but anyway.
Anyway, fortunately, science doesn't have to make. It's not in the business of making judgments and settling disputes. So we have a different remit in science. Our job is not to sort out the playground grievances of humans.
No.
We're dealing with non-animate material most of the time.
Well, I mean, would you not say that there was a slight parallel, because there are sometimes groups of different scientists who take a different view about a particular piece of research, and so that further scientific work will be required in order to settle that dispute.
Certainly, yes.
Yeah.
What you're talking about there, you see, I like to think of science as a two-stage process. First of all, there's the looking forward and wondering what the solution to the mystery might be. Then there's doing the investigation and finding out whether the proposition that you imagined matches reality, observations of the natural realm. And once you've got that, then you have a conclusion. Your proposition is either correct or incorrect. And now you've banked that and it's in the past, and you can sit on that and look forward to the next mystery.
Yes. Yeah.
So yes, when we're wondering about mysteries, of course, science can be divided into 2 or 3 camps, each having their own proposition, their own idea of what the explanation might be, and they can defend their particular baby in the same way that a lawyer would if they were making a case in court.
Yeah.
So, but that doesn't happen to all the stuff we've banked. The things that we've researched, found the matching observations, and confirmed the propositions to be good, then until they're challenged, and everything is only up to date, so tomorrow we may get new observations that challenge some of our previous understanding, but everything that's in the past that's up to date is not really open for contention. Theoretically it is. Theoretically in science we never say anything is finished. We all say it's provisional because of this uncertainty about what new stuff we might find tomorrow. But in practice, we don't really doubt that if I jump out of this window, I'll fall, So there's a mountain of science which is established.
Yes. Yeah. Well, of course, evolution theory is the one thing that has been established, but is still being disputed by certain people.
By people who don't understand it.
Yes. Yeah. Well, they deliberately
Yes.
Don't understand it and distort it.
Yes.
For their own ends. Yeah.
That's right. They don't want, it shakes their belief system, and they don't want to allow that to be broken. So I've put truth in quotation marks here.
All right.
Because that's a contentious word.
Maybe we should use the word correctness of proposition.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure whether that's much better.
No.
But my view is that there's only one truth, and that is everything's going to change.
Yeah.
And everything else is not absolute. There's nothing that's not dependent upon other factors, particularly time. Everything is dependent upon time.
I mean, to say that the sun will change in 5 million years' time is kind of like, it's not really going to change in any time frame that's relevant to us.
Well, yes. That's the human existence is much shorter. Yes.
Yeah.
So my next slide, I've tried to put 2 columns. I don't know whether you can see this. I'll make it as big as I can. There. So the legal and the scientific. I think that the remit of the legal is, we've passed over that. It's to make judgments about grievances and to find out guilt. But in science is a different remit. It's to find out, as close as we can, the truth about the natural realm.
Yeah, I think this is very interesting. Quite right.
So one of the difficulties that legal eagles have to face is that it's all happened, and you can't go back and test it. Whereas in science, you can. You can make up your ideas, and you can look forward to testing them by experiment or some other sort of
Yes, I mean,
investigation.
that's a huge difference. I mean, there are some legal disputes, for instance, a boundary dispute. That's about a physical state. And that can, there's a certain amount of current reality that can be tested and checked, but it's all going to be checked by reference to past plans.
Yes,
You
yes.
but you're right. I think this is very, very true. The law is a very odd thing. It's kind of part arts and part science in that sense. You know.
Yes, it's much more about precedent than science is,
Yeah.
because we can do these things tomorrow, whereas you can't, in legal situation, do the crime again and see who did it.
Well, of
So,
course, they do recreations of crime scenes.
well, recreation is one thing, but
Yeah, but they
actually,
only do that in order to usually try and throw light and
yeah,
find witnesses
yes,
to what happened in the past.
yeah, recreate some closed circuit TV
Yeah,
video or
yeah,
something, but you can't actually repeat the only incident because it's gone. Whereas investigations in science can be repeated many times.
yes. I mean, the science is really looking for a description of reality,
Mm,
whereas the law is talking, as you say, it's about uh, resolution of disputes, and
that's right.
we've got a dispute between Russia and the West and Ukraine at
Yes,
the moment.
yes,
And whenever I turn the telly on, I hear each side repeating their mantras.
yes,
And
yes,
I was thinking, God, please, can we have some kind of mediation here? Some
yes, yes,
wise person who will go to both sides and try
yes,
and work out what it is they really need from
yes,
the other side and see if
yes.
some kind of resolution. Um,
That is a very important topic right now, isn't it? Because
yeah,
and it's about geography because we're lucky in that we know where we are and who we are. And we have a clear boundary. It's the sea. But
mm,
that part of Europe doesn't have anything like that. It's
no,
all fair. There's no major mountain ranges. There's no major rivers. It's all fairly flat agricultural land, and the boundaries are fairly blurred as a result of that. Nobody's built any walls much, and
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 the
the boundary,
boundaries of states have shifted multiple times over the
yeah,
centuries.
exactly, and have only been agreed fairly recently. I mean, Ukraine wasn't a sovereign nation until the USSR broke up in the early 90s, 1990s.
Yes, but I mean, I do sympathize with the Russian position in this sense that that historically Ukraine and Russia
Mm,
had a common history, and in fact, I think the Russian culture really started in Ukraine,
mm,
strangely enough. And there's a lovely story about an early Russian king whose name I've forgotten, or leader, in about 800 or something like that, or maybe 850,
mm,
and he decided that he wanted to modernize his people. So he thought, well, I'll have a look at Islam and at Christianity
mhm,
because they were pagans, and see if which one to go for. And he went to he found out about Islam. He found out that they didn't drink alcohol, they didn't eat pork, they didn't have singing and dancing. And he thought, oh
mm.
crumbs, I don't fancy that one. So he
Okay.
went to Byzantium, and of course they do. They had lots of alcohol, pork,
Yes,
and they had glittering ceremonies and
yes,
music and everything. He thought that's the one for us, and
yes,
that's why Russia is Orthodox.
yes, absolutely.
What a great story that is.
It is, isn't it? Yes. And the funny thing is that because of the collapse of the USSR, there's a little bit of Russia around St. Petersburg that is actually separated off from the major part of Russia by Belarus.
So you're talking about Kaliningrad, aren't you?
Yes.
It used to be Königsberg.
Mm,
It used to be a little Prussian or German place, and I think Kant lived there. But now the Russians have got it, and they've turned it into a little bit of Russia. Yeah.
Yes, but it's separated from the main part
It
of
is.
Russia.
Yeah.
It's a little red bit on its own.
I mean, I think they have to go through either Poland or Lithuania to get to it, as well as Belarus. If
Yes,
I'm
yes,
not
that's
mistaken.
right.
Yeah.
There's a number of different routes.
Yeah.
And this is all disputed, especially with regard to gas pipes.
Yeah.
Anyway, moving back to my table here.
Yeah.
We've got the subject is human disputes, which is always going to be difficult. Whereas in science, the subject is material things and forces, which, are necessarily essentially simpler.
Well, some of them are animals, which are, of course, similar to humans in being animals, but
At the top end, yes, of course.
yeah.
Yes. So legal, I've said, is about narrative and argument, because you have to construct a story when you make a case, don't you?
Yes.
And whereas science is not interested in stories, it's about observations. In fact, one of my complaints about when I'm arguing with theists is about the fact that they pay such store to stories. This is what it says in the Bible, and this is the story of the Jonah and the whale and all that sort of stuff. And I'm saying, no, we want evidence. We don't want narrative. We want evidence.
Well, I think stories have a place, but not when you're looking for truth. I mean, it's conceivable that a piece of mythology or a story, like the Emperor Has No Clothes, that story, there are some useful pieces of wisdom in there, but they don't reflect any historical actual event.
No, and the problem is you can probably find the opposite story too.
Yeah, probably.
So my next point is that legal is a mix of facts and opinions. Now, obviously, you want as many facts as you can get, but they're not always available in a court of law, and you have to fall back on opinion. What do you think of that?
I think it's facts and interpretation of facts, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay.
And then facts and interpretation of evidence. And assessing evidence, that's where the evidence really comes in. It's not that often you get a very bare, obvious, straightforward fact in a legal. Well, I suppose you do. Yeah, but in that sense, there's a parallel, because science is interpreting the evidence and interpreting, isn't it, the research evidence, the research findings. I mean, you see all these papers come out all the time, and they're talking about research, and then other people come and criticize those papers and say the research doesn't mean that, or the research method has been wrong. So it's in that sense there's a parallel there, I think.
Well, the thing is, whereas in the legal situation, you're trying to be right. You want to be right. You don't want your outcome to be challenged. In the science situation, we should welcome being wrong, because
yes, that's true.
That's how we learn something.
Yes, there's another thing in the law. But once you've determined what the facts are, and in fact, the question of which facts are relevant is decided by the law. So the law also has to be taken into account and interpreted and understood, the relevant pieces of law, looking at the facts. And then, you often get, for instance, somebody just the other day who murdered, I think, his girlfriend or something, and he only got 13 years in prison. And of course, it turned out actually that he had admitted manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. So he admitted killing this person, but he said, I was affected in my mind by something. And so there's mental health again. And that is why he was treated differently to a murderer who would have got 20, 30 years.
Yes, yes, yes. And diagnosis, particularly of mental conditions, is fraught with difficulty, isn't it? That's why it becomes more of a matter of expert opinion from
Yeah.
people who have studied many cases and recognize
Yes.
the trend or the symptoms when they meet them. There's nothing there you can actually measure much.
Well, the interesting thing about mental health, especially in mental hospitals and so forth, is that there is and this is why I find it interesting. It's a sort of interface between law and medical science.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. So Frank, hello Frank. Thanks for watching us. Frank is my friend in Kentucky, and he's agreeing that we learn from our errors.
Yes, I've seen him on your show before.
Yes.
Hiya, Frank.
Yes. And so going back to my table here, the style in which these two processes are conducted is quite different, because the legal situation sets itself up like a gladiatorial contest. You have one side biased to prosecute and the other side biased to defend.
Well, that's not entirely correct, but I can see where you're coming from. Whereas the scientific style is impartiality. The scientific style is an inquisition, isn't it? It's an inquiry.
Yeah, which is more like French law.
Well, I was going to say,
Yes.
in English law, in county courts and criminal courts, you do have this gladiatorial, two sides battling it out, a bit like the House of Commons. But in tribunals, we don't have that. We have an inquisitorial system, except in employment tribunals. But for tribunals, mental health, for instance, and immigration, or most tribunals are between the citizen and the state.
Yeah.
And so there is no equivalence of power there. So the tribunal does not have have two sides so much as has an inquiry. It is more continental. So the tribunal has the role of finding out the information for it to make the decision about detaining somebody in hospital, or whether they are to be allowed to go to remain in the United Kingdom, or whatever it is.
Yes.
I mean, I don't want to overstate this, because there is a little bit of gladiatorial, especially in the immigration, but not a little, quite a bit. But the basic principle is that it's the tribunal's job to find out the information. And
I like tribunals much more than judge and jury in that case. And it makes me worry a bit about America, because the lawyers have managed to insert themselves into many more facets of human endeavor than they have in this country. So you turn to a legal system to sort out all sorts of disputes that we would never take to, a lawyer, or to a court, or to a policeman. We would settle them in some other way.
I think there's a tendency for us to go down the same road as the Americans.
We follow him after about 50 years. Yes.
Yeah, I think there is that trend.
I regret it. And my final point is that the outcome of a legal determination may be reversed. And we know this to such an extent that we have a system by which it can be reversed. The appeal
system. Absolutely.
Yeah. Whereas in science, we use statistics to verify our outcome, which means that although they may be tweaked, shall we say, certainly in the last 150 years, we haven't had anything completely reversed.
Right. Yeah. Well, phlogiston possibly, but
that was more than 150 years ago.
Oh,
you
right.
see.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
No,
so what?
that's a fascinating sort of list you've got there, and that's a very interesting and enlightening discussion, I think.
I'll sell you the list for a very modest fee.
Yes, I mean, I could put that in my talk, those kind of things, although the talk is already long enough. Yeah.
Well, that's why I wanted to do it in this second bite of the cherry, really.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we wanted to find out what you're now doing, your medical health, medical hospital involvement as a chaplain. What does a chaplain do?
Yes. Well, yeah, the word chaplain to begin with is puts some people off because it's a religious word. But the reality is that as our non-religious culture, humanist and atheist culture builds in this country, we're moving into areas more and more which were previously the exclusive domain of religious people.
Yeah.
So celebrants is already an example of that. Celebrants go and do their ceremonies often in chapels, cemetery chapels, crematorium chapels.
Yes.
So the
I've
chaplain,
attended one by the gravesite.
say that again.
I've attended one by the
Right.
gravesite.
Yeah.
Humanist Celebrant.
And the word chaplain is not about chapels. Apparently, the origin of the word is something to do with a cloak or something. But so it is another word that we've recovered for civilian use. That's the way I like to put it. And another word is spirituality. There's a guy called Comte. What's his name? The French Comte Gonville or something. Sponville. Comte Sponville, who's written a little book called The Little Book of Atheist Spirituality.
Oh yeah.
So and people and if you look at the NHS description of the word spirituality, it doesn't really refer necessarily to religious feelings. So yes, the reality is that modern chaplaincy, and this applies to religious chaplaincy as well as humanist chaplaincy, is about existential support to the patient or prisoner or whoever it is. And when I say existential support, I'm talking about helping that person through the big life changes and challenges and stresses that they're experiencing by virtue of being locked up in a psychiatric ward or prison, or being in a hospice facing death, or being in a hospital facing possibly disability or facing major threats to their health. And a lot of that is just listening to them and sympathizing with them and being with them. But if you're a religious chaplain, then you will also offer religious services.
Yes.
Which I won't be doing. But I mean, so Anglicans and so forth will have a prayer, or they will have a service or Holy Communion, or Catholics will perhaps organize a confession. Those are specific religious things which we don't obviously offer. But we do offer some things which, I mean, sometimes I have been asked for a prayer and I've said, well, I don't believe in God and we don't do prayer. Oh, it doesn't matter, and so I've ended up giving them a well-wishing.
Yes.
A well-wishing is a bit like a prayer, but there's no transcendental element to it.
Yes.
And when I've done it, apparently the magic works just as well.
Yes, probably does. It's the placebo effect.
Yes, and I mean, the bizarre thing is that patients, for instance, they ask for rosaries, and the Anglican chaplain that works with me does a real trade in these rosaries. They're specially designed so that people can't strangle themselves or kill themselves with them, and she dishes them out not just to Catholics and Anglicans even, but also to all sorts of people. Even Muslims have been known to wear them because they're sort of like a talisman of good luck or something, is a bit of magic for them.
Yeah, they're sold for a fee, presumably.
No. Handed out.
Oh,
I don't know
Okay.
who funds them. I mean, they
Yeah.
only cost a few pence each, apparently, these things.
Yeah. A bit like a poppy on Poppy Day.
Well, no, because a poppy doesn't necessarily. A poppy just represents that you're kind of
Mm,
you're a member of the English nation and you are supporting our
mm,
soldiers.
yeah,
The rosary is it's a thing that Catholics use by way of
yeah,
devotion, and Muslims have prayer beads rather similar.
yes,
But
yeah,
it's used in this case as a sort of protective piece
yeah,
of magic. You know,
yes, yeah,
it's going to protect me from harm or
yes,
something.
yeah. So
Um,
it's more like a pyramid or a crystal in that sense.
well, yes, yes, a crystal. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, all sorts of things like that.
Mm.
People
Well,
believe in.
when I was in hospital, and this was 8 years ago, nearly, uh, I had a visit from a Christian pastor who came round as the hospital chaplain. I don't know whether this was St. Thomas's in London. I don't know whether they've got a humanist one now,
Oh,
but
they had a humanist one then,
did they?
because 8 years ago,
Mm,
David Savage, who
mm,
pioneered humanist chaplaincy,
mm.
was a humanist um, chaplain already in St. Thomas's.
Oh, right.
That's
Okay.
where the pioneering work was done. And in fact,
Ah,
I would urge your viewers, if
yeah.
they ever find themselves in hospital, ask for the humanist chaplain. Because
Yes.
even if there isn't one, just asking for one
Yes.
shows them that there should be one.
Yes. 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 There's a need that has to be addressed. Indeed.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. So I've got some other things that I'm not going to throw at you now because we're running out of time. But you've been talking about equivocation and how words can be used in different ways. And of course, spiritual is one such word, which
Yes. Yes.
means pretty much what you want it to mean.
Yes.
And so look, let me just show you a couple of these because I've got a dictionary. I've made a dictionary.
Oh, yes. I love this. Yeah.
So I'm going to put up the Christish word. This is the name for the language I've given it, because particularly we were talking about this the other day. Particularly, it's an English thing, isn't it, to speak not exactly in riddles, but between the lines, because we very often say something up front which is the meaning is really hidden. My favorite example of this, the one I use most often, is good luck with that.
Yes.
I don't mean good luck with that. What I mean is you haven't got a hope in hell.
Yes. 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 Yes.
And this is a funny English way of doing things. So here we go. There's the word dead, and the guy with the halo, the Christian there, thinks it means living in heaven or hell. So my next slide will give the atheist interpretation of that word. What do you think he says?
Dead. Yes.
There you go.
Yeah.
Spot on.
Yeah.
So I've got a whole series of these
Yeah.
that blasphemy, insult to God, punishable by stoning. What do you think the atheist says?
Free expression or something.
Everyone's right
Yeah.
to mock God.
Yeah.
So we've got, there's a whole lot of these that I'll
Mm.
do next week because I want to say something about my next week's show
Mm.
because it's going to be different. It's not going to be a 1 hour chat with an interesting guest like normal. It's going to be a marathon. It's going to be from 8:30 UK time to midnight UK time because it's the first leg of a fundraising event that will then, I'll hand over the baton to the American YouTuber Ethan Michael, who's otherwise known, his channel is known as Your Friendly Neighborhood Atheist. And he will then take the baton and run on through our night from midnight UK to 4 a.m. And the purpose of this is to raise funds for recovering from religion organization.
That's brilliant.
And that's the website. And as you know, I'm sure you know, recovering from religion is exactly, it says, does what it says on the tin.
Yeah.
It's to help people who have been damaged through being raised in a religion and then having to undergo the tunneling necessary to escape from it.
Yes.
And some religions are worse at this than others, because if you're a Jehovah's Witness, then when you do finally get out, you are disfellowshipped, which
Yes.
means everyone you knew in the past now hates you and doesn't acknowledge your existence, and you've got to
Yeah.
start life afresh, which is it's chronic. It's
Yes.
amazing.
Muslims and have the same problem, or
Yes,
even
yes,
worse. And other
yes,
cults do it as well. Plymouth
yes, yes,
Brethren and people like this.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
Seventh-day Adventism is another
Yeah.
one that's quite difficult to get out of. So recovering from religion helps those people who suffer from this variant of PTSD, which is caused by their religious upbringing.
Yeah.
And Ethan and I, and a lot of others, and I know you've agreed to be one of our victims, coming on for a
I'm
few
very
minutes.
happy to support it. I think it's a brilliant charity, and I mean it's really needed. And I wonder if the Australians can be persuaded to take it on from 4 o'clock in the morning.
Well, that's a good point, actually. I've
Yeah.
got some friends in Australia who may very well do that.
Mm.
I'll make that suggestion to them, and I'll attribute it to you.
Well, I'm an Australian citizen. I should have mentioned that.
Are you? All right. How did
Yes,
that happen?
as well as British. Well, actually, my mother was a sort of like a GI bride. My father was in the Navy in the war,
Mm,
and then the ship called at Sydney,
mm.
and that's where it all started. Yes.
You see, well, we won't delve too deeply into that. Anyway, that's going to be my show next week. So I won't have one guest. I'll have a number of guests who are just popping by, and I've got a co-host who will help me with this, and I'll do some more of those words, those translations.
Yes, I think that they're great. Those I think that's it. It actually helps to explain where we're coming from.
If you've got some
it
other
may
suggestions, if you've got some more words that you would like to do in this way, I'll be happy to add them to the PowerPoint presentation,
yes.
which goes from side to side. So
Well, let me
have
just make a note of that. Christish ideas. Yeah.
yeah, let me have your thoughts on that.
Yeah. 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 So that's I think that there is a cultural thing going on here. Sadly we're dividing into a more and more sort of cultural tribes, and you've got your evangelicals who even begin to speak a different language. So I think one of the useful things to do is to spend some time talking to people who are religious, and the people who talk to us are usually easier to talk with anyway. Sadly, the people who we really need to reach don't like us and are very defensive, but it's still worth trying.
We're chipping away at it, aren't we?
Yeah, I think so.
We're approaching through the moderates who will engage, and hopefully we're going to get to the core, the fundamentalists who currently won't, but eventually, if we put our way through the thick skin of moderates.
Well, I think one of the things is just being there. And
yes,
that's one of the things in my chaplaincy team. I'm just there, and the fact that I'm there changes the dynamics of that team.
Yes,
and I think that's a start.
Yes. Well, it helps to show that we're just humans. We're not some sort of God-hating, baby-eating phenomenon that they like to paint us as. Anyway, that's next week. We shall be doing that, and I shall be propping my eyes open with matchsticks to try and keep awake all that time. So, anybody who's seeing this in the future in the podcast form and who wants to take part and help to raise money for this very good cause, please get in touch. You can do so underneath the video, where you can leave your comments, and we'll see if we can raise some really good funds for recovering from religion. Thanks for letting me do that plug, Guy.
Great stuff.
And thank you for being my guest today.
Pleasure.
Great. See you again.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Where's your outro? I'll find it. There it is. Here we go. Bye.